Welcome back to the Garden with Joy and Holly radio show. Moments away, author Kim Roman. But first, Simple Grow has a product that'll make your plants happy, whether they're indoors or out or any time of year.
Are you worrying about your plant growth? Provide your plants with what they need to grow to their potential. Simple Grow offers 100% organic worm castings at simplegrow.com. Unlike other worm casting products, when you order from Simple Grow, you're getting 100% worm castings, not filler plus castings. You can promote ideal soil structure and aeration with Simple Grow's all-natural odor-free worm castings. There's only one ingredient, worm castings. No chemicals or additives will seep into your food, and it doesn't smell like other fertilizers. You can use it indoor or outside. You can order by the bag, ton, truckload, bundle. Check out what they have with their 100% worm castings and order today at simplegrow.com.
Well, Holly, let's go to the Proclamation Hotline, brought to you by Proclamation Goods, and bring in our guests for this week.
Kim Roman is the owner of Square Foot Gardening for You. She's also a writer, educator, and experienced vegetable gardener. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Holly.
Well, we thank you, Kim, for taking time out of your day to not only join Holly and myself, but all of our listeners and enlighten us with some of your knowledge. And I'll start with this question. For gardeners who may be new or just not familiar with this method, what is square foot gardening?
Okay, well, first I'm going to give a quick history. The original method was created by Mel Bartholomew back in 1976, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was graduating high school. And it was unique because he was not a horticulturist and not even a master gardener, but he was a civil engineer and an efficiency expert. And when he retired, he took up gardening and hated it. Back then, remember, it was single row gardening, and it was way too much work, and many common practices didn't make sense to Mel. He went from coast to coast and asked gardening experts why this and why that, and of course the answer was always the same, and that's because it's the way we've always done it. Now, the original method was an in-ground method, and that worked really well for most people, but some of them were still having, problems and not as much success as they wanted. And when he had 10 major improvements, the most prominent being not using your native soil and using a raised bed, well, he changed to the all-new square foot gardening in 2005. And it's even a lot easier. So at that time, he also created the Square Foot Gardening Foundation and trained certified instructors. Now for the method. In a nutshell, you're going to find a level piece of land. You're going to mow the grass on the lowest setting. You don't need to remove the sod unless it's really craggy. And then you're just going to kind of scrape it off with a shovel. You're going to lay down a layer of heavy-duty weed cloth or cardboard. Place a bottomless raised bed. Basically, it's a frame made from just 4 pieces of lumber. You put that on top of the cloth. A typical configuration is a 4 foot by 4 foot, and you're going to fill that with the great growing medium that we call Mel's Mix, and I'll expand on that in a little bit. You're going to put a grid on top of the mix, and virtually it's just a visual divider and kind of divides the raised beds into approximate 12-inch squares, and then you're going to plant. Now, compared to that traditional row garden I was talking about, you're going to get 100% of the harvest using just 20% of the space, 10% of the water, 5% of the seeds, 2% of the work, and virtually no weeds. Who's in for that?
Yeah.
It's definitely, very understandable method and the appeal to it. So talk to us about the different types of raised beds that most people, know of.
Okay, so first off, the most common one, the one I just talked about, was a bottomless raised bed, and that's called a ground bed. And let's say, though, you need to garden on your deck or patio or other hard surface. Well, you're going to take that bottomless raised bed and you're going to make a patio bed out of it simply by attaching a piece of plywood using galvanized screws to the bottom of that bed. Now, the plywood should be be a minimum of ½ inch thick, but 3/4 would be better. Now you're going to drain drainage holes, or you're going to drill drainage holes approximately every square foot, and an extra 1 or 2 holes in each of the 4 outer corners. You're going to raise it up, though, on something like bricks, and that's so that the excess water can drain out of it. Now, let's say you have a bad back or you use a wheelchair. Now, that patio box, all you have to do is attach legs to it, and you've got a tabletop or elevated box. Square foot gardening is all about inclusion and customization.
Now, you mentioned the 4 by 4 foot raised bed. Does it have to be that size, or can we customize it to meet the requirements of the gardener?
Absolutely. In general, we talk about a 4x4, but it can be whatever size works for your situation. Generally, a 4-foot raised bed, the average human can reach in and work in the center squares about 2 feet. So that works just perfectly. But if you're talking about children or more petite people, they can only reach in 8 inches. So you would use a 3x3. Now, at my old house, I had my square foot garden up against the fence line, so it could only be 2 feet wide, so I could reach in that 2 feet. It was 2 feet by 23 feet, so totally customizable.
Okay, great. So you said you were going to talk about Mel's Mix, and as you promised, could you tell us more about that?
Sure. Mel's Mix is the growing medium that we use, and by volume, it's 1/3 peat moss or cocoa fiber, 1/3 coarse vermiculite, and 1/3 of a great blended compost made of at least 5 different ingredients. Another substitute for peat moss, though, would be pit moss, P-I-T-T, pit moss, which is made from recycled paper. Unlike peat, it is going to deteriorate a lot faster, so you're going to kind of need to add that every year. And it's been really impossible to find coarse vermiculite since the pandemic. So the Square Foot Gardening Foundation is saying that you can use like 2/3 compost and 1/3 of peat or cocoa or that pit moss. It's not optimal, but it is doable. And you really should add vermiculite when it's available. But we're trying to find other substitutes for vermiculite, and I'm trialing a mix that contains rice hulls, Hulls, rice hulls. And again, unlike vermiculite, which lasts a decade or more, the hulls would need to be added to yearly. And that reminds me, in most climates, we are able to use each square foot 2 to 3 times a growing season. For instance, early spring would be 4-leaf lettuces. You're going to be ready with a pepper transplant for summer. And then in the fall, you're going to be able to put in 16 radishes in that same square. Every time you pull something out of a square, you're going to add a trowel of compost, and that's going to refresh the nutrients. So we rarely, if ever, have to use additional fertilizer.
Fantastic. So we are talking with Kim Roman, owner of the Square Foot Gardening for You. And I just want to talk about your organization, Square Foot Gardening for You. What is Square Foot Gardening for You? And what is it?
Sure. Okay, so I'm not sure the current Square Foot Gardening Foundation policy, but in 2010, when I became a certified instructor, Mel Bartholomew was allowing us to use the name Square Foot Gardening in our businesses. So I chose Square Foot Gardening for You, the number 4 letter U. And my mission is the same as the foundation's, and that's to end world hunger 1 square foot at a time. And when we become CIs, Mel asked us to go into our communities and around the world to teach people to grow their own food.
And you have traveled around the world to teach people about Square Foot Gardening. And can you talk about a memorable time or something that was really notable that you just really found a lot of joy in what you were doing that you'll never forget again?
Great, thank you. The reason I charge for my classes and talks is so that I can provide classes, books, and gardens to organizations that help the homeless, at-risk youth, and those living in food deserts. And because I'm an Air Force veteran, I also have a heart for wounded veterans. But my absolute favorite moment was being able to teach composting and gardening in Kenya on a mission trip with my church.
I mean, I want to go back to you talked about the raised bed model. Now, is that in a video? And how deep, for people who are wanting to create a raised bed square foot, how deep should this bed be, or is there a right and wrong depth?
Well, actually, obviously you can make them as deep as you would like, but through decades of just observational research, we've found that just 6 inches of Mel's mix is sufficient for most vegetables and most climates. You can use an 8-inch deep raised bed, and they're suggested if you're going to grow squash or melons, or if you live in a hot, dry climate.
Well, is there something that you would highly recommend not growing in a small space, and why would that be? And something you would really that you would find that would not be good there, and something that would be the across the board successful?
Okay, this is a great question. I personally do not like to grow things like bush zucchini because that would take up an entire 3-foot by 3-foot area. That's 9 squares. I'd much rather grow 9 different vegetables in that space. I also don't like growing perennial herbs in my square foot garden because, of course, they can outgrow that single square. Those good woody rosemary and things like that. And of course, mint. Never grow mint in a garden in a raised bed. But my favorite success is probably growing melons and vining anything vining, squash, melons, things like that on what's called a squash arch. And my last yard was so tiny that I would never have thought about growing something like spaghetti squash in that tiny yard. But while the vine grew 28 feet long, it only took up 2 square feet of ground space, and the raised bed, again, was only 8 inches deep.
Now, you talk about this arch, and then if you don't have that capability, or you're planting it like on the outer edge so you can allow it to go in the yard and not take over the bed, is that how you want to do that?
You could absolutely do that. I just did not have the space to do that in mind. But yes, absolutely. Exactly where you would place it is on that outer edge.
Well, we've greatly appreciate. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Holly.
I think a lot of people, I know, like Joey had to kind of learn this because he grew up on a farm and they had a lot of space to grow vegetables. And I grew up in the city, and you can trellis so many things. And I know that's definitely. Is there like a favorite trellising method you have to make small space gardening more possible?
Well, in the book, they do show a very basic trellis that you can make with electrical conduit and nylon trellis netting, which is absolutely fantastic. If people want to know more about that, they can email me. But the squash arch, bamboo poles, I would make little teepees and grow beans and peas up those.
Well, we greatly appreciate the knowledge and the time you've offered, Kim, to not only Holly and myself, but our listeners. How can people find out more about you and find your book and books?
Okay, great. So my website is sfg4u.com. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And the easiest thing to search for is at Square Foot Gardening, 4 U, no spaces, or at Your Indoor Food Garden. And that one is based off of my book, which is How to Garden Indoors and Grow Your Own Food Year-Round. And that's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and hopefully your local bookstore.
And as things maneuver through the world, that would be a very important book to pick up, in my suggestion.
That's my opinion, too.
Yeah. Well, Kim, we greatly thank you. We appreciate the time, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Joey and Holly.
Absolutely.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.